So I'm going to change gears a little bit. Kind of heard about some really interesting stuff from the previous two speakers, but I'm going to kind of talk about some things that maybe give people a little bit of heartburn in this room, right? Talking about sustainability and especially environmental impacts and some of the perceptions that exist out there. So what I'll try to cover and keep it within a half hour is thinking about some of this environmental impact narrative that I would say that's out there, essentially that we should eat less meat for less heat, right, to curb climate change, which is pretty popular in the popular press. And think about what role or what is the value proposition that we bring to a sustainable food system. What differentiates beef from chicken, from pork, from other protein choices that consumers have? And what are our opportunities to improve, right? So where can we actually get better thinking about the long term, the next several decades into the future? So I'm sure all of you have seen these kind of products, right? So-called plant-based burgers. So we have people that are buying Prime burgers. That's a really interesting concept to me. But we also have people that are saying, I want to buy a more sustainable product, and I believe that is a plant-based burger, right? So if you haven't heard of these products, there's different companies that are out there, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods. There are also, of course, still in development lab culture products, essentially what I would like to call lab slime, even though they'd like to call themselves clean meat, right? But these products, they market themselves as we're made from plants and therefore we're better. Okay, so hold on to that idea of made from plants. We'll come back to that later. We see that in food service or food companies that this is a trend that people are talking about, right? So plant-based diets, plant-forward diets. Okay, so this is a medium piece that was from the chairman of Nestle USA. You can see in the quote over there on the screen, right? Increasing nutritious plant-based options can have a positive impact for our consumers and for our planet, right? Implying that meat is not good, right? And especially beef is usually in the crosshairs of not being good for the planet. And then this is interesting. This is a recent announcement from a burger company in Sweden that their goal is to sell less red meat because they want to be right for the planet. Okay, so they're going to do more blended products, more so-called green burgers, right? Implying again that beef-based burgers are not green. And it seems like every day we have a study that comes out that tells us that beef is terrible for the planet. This is one that was published in the journal Science, right? Quite a prestigious journal. And said, looking at all these different life cycle assessments of food items, we would be much better off if we ate less meat. Right? That would make the planet a better place. And you guys can see what I bolded there in terms of this excerpt from this Guardian article, the comparison of beef versus plant protein, such as peas and starch, with even the lowest impact beef responsible for 6 times more greenhouse gases and 36 times more land. Okay? So just a reality check on some of this stuff, right? There's lots of statistics that get thrown out there, and it's kind of the adage, right? There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So what do the actual data show for in the United States? Okay? So what you're looking at here is information from the latest greenhouse gas emission inventory that is released every year by the US EPA. Okay? And so if we look at how much greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture in general, okay, it's about 8.6% of US emissions come from agriculture. Transportation is about 26%, electricity is around 29 or 30%, just for a frame of reference. If we look at just beef specifically, in terms of direct emissions, we're about 2% of US greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so not what a lot of these articles would have you believe, okay, here in the US. And the other thing that I like about this report that it points out is essentially all of agriculture's emissions get offset by all the carbon that gets sequestered by trees in the United States every single year. We don't really talk about that much, or the fact that our emissions have gone down over time from beef production, right? So if we actually are concerned about climate change, American agriculture and American beef, it's not really a place to focus, yet that prevailing narrative and that perception exists, right? Even though the data say something opposite. And then another thing, just to point out in terms of thinking about less meat, less heat, how much meat are we actually eating in the United States? Okay, so this is data from the USDA Economic Research Service. This is meat availability, okay, before losses in terms of pounds available per person in the US, right? So this is not accounting, of course, total amounts are higher higher because we have a growing population over this last 100 years in the United States. However, just to point out a few different things, so beef consumption, if we compare ourselves to 1909, we eat about the same amount of beef per person in the United States, okay? Total red meat is down 3%, okay? Total meat from 1909 is up 53%. You guys can see where that's growing, right? It's those creatures with feathers, right? Chickens. We eat 500% more chicken in this country than we do back 100 years ago, right? So we are now a chicken-eating nation. And in this group, I think that should cause us a little concern, right? People eat more chicken. That has been growing. Beef consumption per capita has been declining. Of course, per capita does not mean demand, right? To be very clear about that. But that trend is real. So this is important because we deal a lot at NCBA with news media articles, reports that come out. One of the ones that came out last year looked at that per capita decline in consumption of beef and said, well, beef has a high carbon footprint, per capita consumption has gone down, therefore, emissions have gone down tremendously, right? That's the story they'd like to tell. But that's not actually why emissions go down, right? Emissions go down because of all the progress that's happened in the supply chain and the production of beef, right? Making us more efficient. And just to demonstrate that, this is just showing 1976, which is when our beef consumption per capita peaked in the United States. On a boneless availability basis, adjusting for all losses, we were at 3 ounces per person per day. Okay, 218 million Americans, 128 million cattle, that's all beef and dairy cattle combined, January 1 inventory. So just a frame of reference, the serving size of beef is 3 ounces, right? So it's not that we eat too much beef in my mind, we eat less than 1 serving size per day today, as you can see in 2017. Beef and dairy cattle, January 1 inventory was 94 million head. We have 326 million Americans, okay? So to counter this idea that declining consumption is actually driving down our emissions, you can look to the far side of the screen, right? What if we produced beef in 2017 with the productivity levels of 1976, okay? We would need a herd of 129 million head. And as we'll go through here, a lot of our emissions, a lot of our environmental impacts are tied to the animals themselves. The methane that they naturally belch out, the feed resources that they need, right? So driving down the number of cattle, especially the supporting herd size, relative to the amount of human food that we produce is a really key driver for us from a sustainability perspective. So it's not per capita consumption, people get that mixed up, but it's hard to explain fractions to reporters, so this still exists in terms of the idea that less meat equals less meat. It's also interesting if we think about this globally, okay? So this is data from the UN FAO in terms of the last 50 years, from 1961 to 2013 or 14, I believe, looking at trends in per capita meat availability per person per year, okay? So again, we have a growing world population of over 3 billion people over this time frame, right? So this is not total, but just per person. So in 1961, bovine meat dominated, right, in terms of the amount of meat people ate. Now, pork and chicken are ahead of us, right, in terms of total amount of meat that people consume around the world. I think this is important because we often use high-level statistics where we talk about increasing demand, and we say we're going to need 70% more animal protein in the future. And of course, there's growth because we're going to add 2 billion people. But that mix, we're probably going to have people eating more monogastric animal proteins, right? Realistically, I don't think these trend lines are going to shift dramatically over the next 3 decades looking out into the future. And this is really reflected in the number of animals around the world as well. I say number of animals, I threw humans in on the bottom there, right? So you can see how much our population has grown as well. So cattle in the world, from 1961 to 2016, we've increased our cattle herd by 57%. We've increased the number of chickens by 481%, right? And that's just one-time inventory, because of course that turns over many times within a year, right? So there's literally billions and billions of chickens in the world. So again, this is not to be anti-chicken speech, but good Lord, we have a lot of chickens in the world, right? So I put all this information up here just as kind of a frame of reference to think about what is going to happen by 2050 in terms of if we continue on these trends that we've been on in terms of producing more beef per animal and keep our trends of per capita consumption globally, okay? So this is just some back of the envelope math, right? Not fancy modeling or anything, but just what is the change in the global cattle herd relative today going to be by 2050 if we have a population of 9.8 billion people, which is what the UN is projecting now, okay? So you can see there, the first scenario, if we just continue as is, we're probably going to increase our cattle herd by 7%. We'll probably hit like 1.6 billion cattle. Which again, to me, it's like, why are we talking about this from a climate change perspective, right? It's not a huge growth. But just to show the power of productivity and why that is so key when we talk about sustainability, you can look at the second scenario there. What if we just increase the rate of productivity that we've seen historically in the United States around the world, right? Not get everybody to where we're at, but just that rate of change, that rate of improvement. We could actually have a cattle herd that's 27% smaller than today, right? And produce enough beef for an additional 2 billion mouths, right? That's huge. So that's a lot less environmental impact, a lot more sustainable, a lot less natural resources used to produce the same amount of human nourishment, right? So that's a key concept. The third scenario, it's not going to happen, but it just shows you how much ahead of the rest of the world we are, right? So if we could universally achieve the productivity that we have in U.S. beef, right, we could cut the global cattle herd 53% by 2050 and still meet the beef demand of 9.8 billion people, right? So it's just to show, for all the things that we talk about, productivity is really tied to sustainability, and obviously it's usually tied to profitability as well. So I'll come back to my outline, thinking about why the heck do we even have ruminants in our food system? Right? All these news articles you read, oh, we should just be eating chickens and pigs and just give up these belching cows, right? They're destroying the environment. What is our actual value proposition? Why should we exist? And I would put forward that it's what's on the screen, right? So our fundamental value proposition for beef to a sustainable food system is we take lower value resources, or resources that have no value for the human food system in terms of plants and the land bases that we use, and we upcycle it to a higher value protein, micronutrients, and all the ancillary products that we get from cattle, right? From leather to pharmaceuticals. And that is our value proposition that we have. That's the positive. So to me, when we think about sustainability, obviously we have to think about profitability, we have to think about economic sustainability, but we should also be thinking about how do we enhance this upcycling value while minimizing negative outcomes and increasing social acceptability, right? Getting that story out there about what our actual impacts are and the positives that we bring to the table. So a little bit more context on this whole environmental issue. This information that you're looking at on the screen is actually from the UN FAO. This is a global assessment of animal proteins across different species that was published in 2013, okay? So these box plots that you're looking at are essentially carbon footprints. The amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced per unit of protein, okay, for different species. So you have beef, cattle milk, small ruminant meat, milk, pork, chicken meat, and chicken eggs. So you can see a few different things, right? Clearly beef does have a higher average carbon footprint as compared to other species. And that's really just related to the biology of the animals themselves, right? They're large ruminant animals. They live longer reproductive time to maturity, and they belch out methane every single day. But there's also a tremendous spread there, and that's kind of what I referenced earlier, right? The United States is going to be on the far low side of that box plot, or maybe even off the chart in terms of low impacts, versus some places in the world that have very high impacts, 50 times greater than here in the US. And just to drive that home, this whole ruminant versus monogastric issue, I think this is another key aspect when we talk about feed conversion efficiency that we should pay attention to. So just to set this up, what you're looking at here is some information that we are just submitted for publication from a regional life cycle assessment of the whole US in terms of feed conversion efficiency. And just so you know, that's not obviously like just feedlot, right? This is a life cycle number. That would be terrible, right, for feed yard feed to gain conversion versus chicken and pork. So that's dry matter conversion, okay, on the left-hand side of the screen. Dry matter pounds to make live weight gain, or to make live weight end products. In the middle, this is the pounds of potentially human edible feed that is actually consumed for each of these species, okay? So what do I mean by human edible feed? If we had to, right, we could eat the field corn, the steam flake corn that we fed cattle. Prefer to eat a steak, right? But you could if you had to. You could eat that feed. So when you look at it that way across these different species, those differences, right, they kind of go away. Because of course our monogastric species are eating more corn and soy products to make gain, right? And then the third column is where we really want to focus. Okay, so there's a couple different things going on here. This is actually looking at how much protein, high quality protein in terms of essential amino acids and digestible amino acids are produced in that product as compared to what the cattle or the animals eat. Okay, so it's a ratio. So as I put in the parentheses there, values greater than 1 mean we're producing more than we're actually using. Okay? So again, not a knock against our monogastric friends, but they're below 1, right, in terms of that ratio. And that's because they use a lot more high quality protein in terms of soy products that they actually feed the animals, right? We don't really use soy in our industry. So this is a key message from a sustainability standpoint. We make more protein than we use, right? We make more high quality protein for the human food supply. So maybe we have a higher carbon footprint, but you can't beat a ruminant for taking something that's of no value and making a difference. So that's the feed side of it, but what about the land use side of it, right? So this is a really great map from the group, the American Farmland Trust, right? That's taking USDA data, essentially mapping different land uses and land use types across the United States, okay? So if you can't see the scale there, essentially the really dark green is all of our cropland, okay? The kind of gray, tan, brown color is all of our forests, of course, in the eastern U.S. And then these yellows and lighter tans are all of our rangelands, okay, in the United States. So I point this out because we often hear about the land footprint of beef, right? We use so much land, and of course everybody in this room knows most of the land we use in this industry can't be used for anything else. That's why we have ruminant animals to use it. But it's even more important, I think, to think about that corn that we do use. I just told you about in the previous slide. So we take, on average, about 2.6 pounds of corn grain per pound of carcass weight we produce in the United States through the whole system. Okay? So that's, given corn yields in 2016, it's about that much. Okay, that black box on the map. It's about 20% of the size of Iowa. Okay? So I think that's important. That's 2% of cropland acres. So this idea that we're using so much land for beef is just really not borne out by the evidence. And as I just told you in the previous slide, we make more protein by using the corn in that black box and running it through cattle than if we ate the corn directly, right? So that's a huge sustainability story. So we have the most environmentally efficient beef production system in the world in the United States, but what are we leaving on the table, right? Where can we get better? How can we think about the next 30, 40, 50 years and say where we want to be? So this is also looking at UNFAO data. This is beef emission intensity, so you can think about it as carbon footprints. Okay, essentially I've looked at all the countries in the world out of that database in 2014 and just ranked them high to low. Okay, so on the y-axis we have carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per kilogram of beef. So you can see the US, we're on the right side, right? In terms of we have lower emissions as compared to many of these other countries. What's key is some of these countries that have higher emissions, livestock products in terms of delivering nutrients, especially to children in their diets, is really, really important, right? So that's something that gets lost in our news media discussions of so-called that meat is bad, right? It's delivering high quality nutrients for people. So we've made a lot of progress. I didn't show you the historical trends, but we've reduced our impacts over time. Essentially, we've gone down this curve over time, right, in the United States. But these emission intensities from the FAO, I won't go into how they're calculated, but they just assume a set amount of methane emissions per head, okay, flat amount. But of course, our animals have gotten bigger. They eat more, right? And that's important because dry matter intake is a very strong driver for methane emissions, right? So are we really making that much progress that this FAO data has shown us? Or have we had some sort of trade-off there with, as our cattle have gotten bigger and made more emissions, use more resources per head, right? So the next few slides, I'm just going to put some high-level USDA data out there just to provoke thought on this topic, okay? So if we think about trends in terms of slaughter weights from USDA over time, of course, cattle slaughter weights have gone up, okay? So haven't cow slaughter weights, okay? Of course, this is all cattle, all beef and dairy cattle together in terms of cows. But just to give you that idea, it's increased linearly over time, okay? And if we think about cow weights as a percent of finished cattle slaughter weights, right? Our trend over those years, it decreased a bit, right? It's been pretty flat, the last 20 years especially, right? So if we think about the amount of feed that we have to use to produce beef, a lot of that feed goes to maintenance. Maintenance of the cows, maintenance of those animals themselves, right? So that's a huge amount of what we do in this country, is just maintaining cattle, okay? And I think this ratio kind of hints to the fact that maybe that progress hasn't been as much as we think over the last few decades. And this is more just back-of-the-envelope math, right? But using those cow slaughter weights, what has been our trend in terms of energy requirements per unit of beef produced in the United States? Cow maintenance requirements per kilo of beef produced, right? So you can see that we have a downward trend in the last 20 years. It's pretty much been flat, right? Our cows have gotten bigger, and we're not increasing the amount of beef that we produce per the amount of maintenance energy we're expending on our cow herd. And if we think about that and expressed in a different way, what about the beef that we produce, or the amount of beef that we produce per hectare of land, right, that's needed to maintain cows, okay? Same trend. Again, I'm just using back-of-the-envelope math here, but just to provoke thought, right? It's been pretty flat over the last 20 years. So go back to that trend line. People are eating more chicken, right? Do we want to give that up? Our competitive advantage to the fact that we have ruminant animals? Are we giving up a lot of potential growth in our products, right, because of this issue? So that's what I'd like to get you all to think about. What are we leaving on the table, right? We've made a lot of progress to be a sustainable industry. I think a lot of the headlines that are about beef are totally out of whack, right, versus the actual data in terms of environmental impact, but that perception exists. So what can we take from our competitors, right, our monogastric friends? And we heard a lot more about it in detail from Michael earlier about feed-to-gain ratio, maybe thinking about it differently as an endpoint, and how do we think about those endpoints better, right? But we're probably nowhere close to the biological potential of feed-to-gain or feed conversion efficiency for cattle, and I think that's a huge, huge opportunity for us. It's definitely what chickens have done, right, over the last several decades. They've made incredible progress in that area. I think we do need to focus on increasing red meat yield and essentially just decreasing whole maintenance costs in the entire industry, right? And even things like reproduction obviously play a role there, right? Are we getting cows bred back as quickly and as frequently as we should? Can we improve our pregnancy rates as a whole industry? And potentially produce less extra fat, right? Less of that external fat that we're not going to consume, or is not as high as value, right? Can we get more taste fat versus external fat produced in this industry? And how can we take further advantage of cattle being ruminants, okay? That is our clear advantage versus chickens and pigs, right? We're not using soy. We have a great story to tell from a sustainability standpoint. So how can we enhance what I would say is what maybe we should focus on, essentially human edible to human edible protein conversion, right? Can we drive down the amount of feed-food competition in this industry even further? And still produce a really high-quality product that people want to consume, a superior eating experience product. And when it comes to sustainability, hopefully those news articles at the beginning that I showed kind of painted this picture, right? That this is a major issue that's out there from a perception standpoint. This slide is more of like a self-review of my job performance, right? That, yeah, we're doing a good job, but maybe we need to do better. We need to be more aggressive on this, because there is this narrative that beef is not sustainable. And I would argue that none of those lab products or plant-based products would even exist if this perception didn't exist, right? There's no market opportunity for them if we haven't created the opportunity for people to think that we're not sustainable, right? Because essentially, these plant-based products are saying we kind of taste as good as a burger, but you can feel good about it, right? They're not saying we're creating a superior eating experience product. Okay, so that's why I think sustainability is so important. It's hard for us to measure, a tangible effect on demand, but it does affect beef's reputation in terms of consumer perception of our products. So coming back to this idea of plant-based meats, right? Food for thought, thinking about what we do in this industry a little bit differently, right? We essentially use the technology that takes solar energy locked up in human edible plants and makes high-quality protein, right? Produces a natural, organic fertilizer while it's doing it, feeds the soil, okay? It's mobile without using fossil fuels, and it self-replicates, right? It's an amazing technology. Of course, it's cattle. And if we're going to talk about plant-based protein, beef is the original plant-based protein, right, in my mind. That's how we should market it. If they want to try to use the word meat, we should say we're plant-based and take that term over. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.